So we've been dealing with Django the past 3 days. But what is Django and why Django? And just why use a framework? And what is a framework?
A framework kind of takes care of the plumbing for an application. All you have to worry about is really just building the application. Like all the underlying stuff is taken care of. And Django is, I've noticed it's very opinionated, like it wants things done a certain way. And I guess that leads to building a more secure application, and an application less prone to errors. But yeah, it kind of includes some templates too. Like it takes all the work out of it. Like the front end, I think is a lot easier. But Django is mainly, I think it's a back end framework.
Yeah. So if we break down like frameworks in general, when you think of a framework outside the context of just software development, what do you think about like when you think of a framework? Like I'm sure at some point in your careers, whether it's in the military or in the civilian world, you had to do something that like something resembled like there's a specific framework of doing things. Does anybody have any examples?
Like a guideline or an outline, or this is the pattern, this is the workflow? Yeah,
like something exactly. It's something exactly like that. It doesn't have to use like the semantic or the language of a framework, but yeah, essentially what you described is a certain way of doing things. And essentially a framework is, or specific in the context of software development, a bunch of software engineers got together and were like, hey, we need to build web applications. Like that's our core job, like in the dawn of the internet and with just web applications and the internet in general. It's like that's pretty much like 90% of our job is going to be working with web applications. So if we're going to be continuously working with web applications, what's the quickest way we can, what are some steps that we are constantly repeating building out like web applications? And a bunch of developers came together and were like, hey, we think we know the best way to build web applications. So they built a framework that does a lot of the heavy lifting for us to build web applications. And out of that became an open source Python web framework called Django. There's other different types of frameworks or other frameworks, even in Python, like Flask. Flask is also a framework. It's just a different type of framework. Some other developers got together and were like, you know what, we think Flask is the better way to develop web applications. And they also have that in other languages as well, like Rails, like Ruby on Rails is a web framework similar to Django, except for Ruby on Rails or Ruby. And then there's these front end frameworks you hear, like React, even though React's really not a framework, but it's large enough to be like called like a framework at times. There's like React front end framework, Angular front end framework. There's like Svelte, all these different frameworks for all these different languages. And it's essentially a group of developers got together and they thought, or they think they know, not they know, but they think they have the best way to develop web applications or whatever type of system they're going to be developing. So it's almost like an ethos on, this is what we believe is the best way to build web applications. And they developed Django. Any questions on that? And Django, as Stephanie said, it's like a workflow. There's a specific patterns and how things need to be executed in a specific order that must occur every single time, or else. And if you deviate from that, it's going to break. Like the whole process is going to break. The whole framework will break. So, any questions, or what questions do you have about that? Nothing. All right. So let's actually build, let's start from scratch and build a Django app. What the hell's going on here? Make directory, Django, Django framework. And I'll zoom in on this too. Nope. All right. And we'll kind of talk about. So here is the process of Django. So inside, and we'll talk through some of these. So with Django, when you get an HTTP request, it comes into our Django project. It goes through this wsgi.python file that you'll never use. Stands for Web Server Gateway Interface, and essentially turns HTTP requests into Python objects, so Python can interact with these HTTP requests. And then it passes that on to a file in our Django project. So let's go ahead and build that all out first. All right, so if I want to build a Django project, what do I first need to do? Let's walk through the steps.
Virtual environment.
All right, so I first need to create a virtual environment, and I can do Python -m venv venv. And again, I can call this whatever I want, but I'm just going to call the virtual environment venv. All right, so I've got my virtual environment there. Now I need to what?
Pip install Django. Well, activate it, yeah.
So, yep. So first I need to activate my virtual environment. So I'm actually in it. So I'm surrounded by that protective bubble, and I'm inside my virtual environment, inside that bubble. So I'm going to source venv bin activate. All right. So I'm currently in my virtual environment, and then I heard install Django. So pip install Django. So that's installing. All right. So I'm going to clear that, and I'm just going to do pip list. If you ever want to see what's installed in your virtual environment, or even on your local machine, that's not when you're not in your local your virtual environment, you can always pip list. So there I've got Django installed. Is there anything I absolutely need to install to get Django working? I think this is it. If I wanted to use a Postgres database, I would need to install PsychoPG2 or PsychopG2. But right now, I don't even want to worry about that. I just want to get this thing up and running. All right. So I'm inside my virtual environment. So I'm going to create a Django project. So I'm going to do Python, Django admin, start project, very straightforward commands, starting a project. And I'm just going to call it Django _proj. All right. So I'm going to clear, list everything out. All right. I actually don't like, because I'm going to have to go back and go another level deeper into my Django project. So I'm actually going to delete that, because I just want everything on the same level, because I'm already in my Django framework directory. I don't want to have to go in another directory down to get into my Django project. So I'm going to rm recursively force remove the Django project, and I'm just going to start over. So list, there we go. And also I'm going to open this into a new VS Code window, which I should have done initially. All right, so I did that. Later, I'm going to open up the terminal again. And when I was in my virtual environment and I reloaded my VS Code window, it automatically kicked me out of my virtual environment. So I'm going to have to activate that again. Because if I look at, I'm currently not in my virtual environment because there's no venv. I can pip list and I can see all the stuff that's on my local machine. So I'm just going to source venv bin activate to activate that again. And I'm going to go up, scroll up for that to create a new Django project. So Django admin Django proj space period. And there we go. I've got my manage.py file on the same level, and I've got my Django project settings right here. So if you look at how this process works, the Django, where the data flows, it's going to come into this WSGI file or this ASGI file. And then it's going to pass me down to my router, to my urls.py file inside of my Django project. Like so. So here are my URLs. And I can get this up and running by running Python manage.py run server. And I can actually go to localhost 8000. And I can see here, I've got my Django project up and running. So easy peasy, I've got a Django project. And with like links to specific documentation and everything. Any questions on getting a Django project up and running?
Is it always going to default to port 8000?
Yep. And you can define the port as well by running Python manage.py. I think it's run server followed by the port number. So if you wanted, what is it like 8080? I think it's just 8080. I think that's what it is. So yeah, now you can see starting development server at 8080. So instead of here, I can go to 8080 and I get the same thing.
Thanks.
Yep, no problem. All right. What the hell? All right. So I've got I've got my Django project up and running, but every Django project needs what to actually like, what have we been building along with the Django project? So we're going to be building a Django app. So I'm just going to do Python manage.py because the manage.py file is the main file that interacts with Django. So Python manage.py, is it start app?
Yes.
All right. All right. I'm just going to call it Django app, or I'll just call it app. Why not? No, I'll call it Django app. All right. So I've got my Django project. That's where all the configuration is and all that fun stuff. And I've got my Django app. So, and let's actually just like slowly build this out. So if you look at this diagram, if we want to get a Django or just get something from our app on the screen, let's go ahead and build this out. So it comes in here. You don't really need to worry about this at all, but just it initially goes to the urls.py file initially in the Django project urls.py file, and then the Django project URLs points to the Django app urls.py file. So let me. So you can see here, there's some like comments on how to do this. But so inside of my Django app URLs, so I'm in here, this Django app URLs, I've already got a URL that I can visit. And if I run that Python manage.py run server, it says you have 18 unapplied migrations. Your project may not work properly until you apply the migrations for admin, auth, content type sessions, run Python, migrate, etc. to apply them. And if I come here and go to 880, or I'm sorry, 800, you can see I've got that. But now if I go to /admin, let's see what happens. I get like a login. So Django, again, Django is developed by a bunch of developers. And pretty much all the applications that you'll probably ever develop have some sort of admin panel where there's someone that has like super admin or admin rights, and they can see behind the scenes in your application, whether they have like access to data or like certain users, or they can delete add users. Well, Django already has that built in for us. So it does a lot of the heavy lifting, which is really nice. So don't really worry about that right now, but just know that this is the first built-in URL that comes with Django. And that's by coming here, it reads this part, and it automatically renders that. Where did it go? Did I kill it?
I think you deleted.
Oh yeah, I deleted it. Thank you. And it automatically renders this little login. All right. But we want to go and interact with our Django app. Whoop. So once I created my Django app, what's the next step I should automatically do right away? So I created my Django app. What's one thing I haven't done yet to get this to kind of work?
Add it to settings.
I need to add my Django app to my settings.py file. So I'm going to say Django _app. I'm just going to put a comma there for the next developer. All right. So I'm going to develop a route that goes to my Django app. So I'm going to create another a route. I'll just do path, and I'm going to call this route, this URL, I'm just going to call it Django-app because it's going to go to my Django app. Just what I'm going to call it. You can call it whatever you want, but I'm going to call it Django app. And if I look here, I'm in my Django project URLs. And now I want to point to my app URLs, so all the URLs that are going to be associated with that app. So I'm going to include in a string URLs. I'm sorry, Django app.urls. So what this is going to do, if I visit the Django app URL, it's going to then point me over to my Django app URLs.file and then look at the other URL pattern that comes after this Django app. So looks like include isn't imported. So I also need to add or import include from the Django URLs module. All right. What questions do you have about this? This could be confusing. I'm going to just delete that.
For the installed apps, does precedence matter where you place it, first or last?
When you say no, so in here?
Yeah.
Nope. So I can install this anywhere. Does not matter. All right. So just a recap, I created my Django app, and then in my project, Django project URLs file, I added another URL pattern called Django app. So when I visit localhost 800 or 8000 / Django -app /, it's going to, once I visit that in my URL, it's going to also look in the Django _app URLs file to look at the remaining URL pattern. And then it's going to do something with that. But now you can kind of see I'm getting an error, module not found error, no module named Django-app URLs. It's because if I look at my Django app directory, it doesn't have a urls.py file. So I'm going to have to create one. So I'm going to create a Django app URLs file. So you can kind of see where this is coming from. It's coming in here. It's going to the urls.py file inside of my Django project. Now it's pointing to my Django app urls.py file. So in here, I'm just going to literally copy that whole thing. Nope. I'm going to import the Django URLs. I'm going to get rid of. So this is what I need right now. So I'm going to create another path, and it's just going to be an empty path. So when I visit Django-app / it's going to come over, look in this Django app URLs, and it's just going to see that there's nothing that comes after this /. So it's going to come over here, and then it's going to point it somewhere else. So this path. So now look at here. So once I visit my Django app URLs, it's going to route me to the views.py file, which handles all of our business logic. So I've got this views.py file inside of my Django app. So I'm going to open that up and I'm going to split the screen. All right. And in here, and there's views, this is where I'm going to create my methods that are going to render a specific something on the screen. So when I visit that Django-app / and I don't have anything after the /, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to render views.index name index. So inside of my views, so I'm going to have to import my views, import from import views. So inside of my views, it's going to be looking for an index method. So once it hits here, it's going to look in my views.py file inside of my index. Look, it's going to look for a method called index. I don't necessarily need to have this name equals index, but that's going to just get in a habit of adding this here because it's going to come up later. So in here, I'm going to create an index method. And this index method is going to take in the request. So like the HTTP request. And let's actually just return an HTTP response. And I'm just going to create a div, hello world, like so. And I believe I need to import HTTP response. Let's see. Yeah, so I need to import this HTTP response method from Django. So I'm going to say from Django.http import HTTP response. What questions do you have about this process? So, Django. See if this works. All right. So I've got my Python, my Django app running. Uh-oh. All right. So if I go to Django/app, now you notice I have a hello world show up. There we go. So what is happening right now? It comes in here. It goes to my urls.py file in my Django project. comes over here. I'm visiting Django app. Now it's saying, hey, now go look in the Django app URLs .py file. So it comes into here, looks into this file. I don't have anything after that /. So it comes into here, it says, hey, there's nothing comes after that /. So that's why this is empty right here. All right, we've got a pattern match or URL pattern match at this path. Go look in the views.index.py file or the views. Yeah, go look in the views.py file and look for a method called index. All right, comes into here, finds a method called index, takes in the request and returns this HTTP response, and it's going to render this HTML.
I have a couple
Questions?
questions.
Yep.
In the URLs.py project folder or project, yeah.
Yep.
How does it know where Django_app.urls is at? Because I would have expected you to need like a dot /.
So include takes it, this method takes in a string that just looks for the app name. Essentially just kind of the way this include method works. You don't have to give in an exact,
Okay.
yeah. It's kind of weird. It's not, again, this is why Django is a little bit different. Kind of, we don't have to give it like an absolute path of where this URLs.py file is. We just give the string of the name of the app .urls.
Got it. The other question might be getting ahead of ourselves, but I'm curious what gets passed in the request on the views index as a parameter.
Right here.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's what your challenge is going to kind of be for today. But yeah, good question. Actually, let's actually build upon that. So I just also want you to know that if I wanted to, so in here, if I wanted to add more items to this, I could add, again, this URL patterns is just an array or a list of paths. So if I wanted to say like path 1 / I can go to view /1, name 1, and then do def 1. Always takes in at least the request, could also take in other arguments. And then it can return this HTTP response. This is the path at /1. So if I come over here and go to /1 / uh-oh, what happened? Oh, it's because I /1 like so. /1. I guess I could have done what? There we go. So that's how you're going to be building out your URLs. Don't worry about making your paths, your URL patterns, a bunch of them yet, because that's what we're going to be doing tomorrow and the next several weeks. So I'm just going to delete that. But does anybody have any question?
I have a quick question, Tom.
Yep.
If you wanted to, back in the views file, I think it was the views file on the right. Sorry. If you were to print the request just to see what's coming in,
Yep.
can you do that? And where
Yep.
would that show up in the server? Or would that show up in the browser?
This will show up in down here. So
Okay.
let's actually look at it. So if I do a refresh, let's come down here. This is what we get. This WSGI request object. It's a get method. So it kind of tells you what kind of method it comes in. But let's look at this Django HTTP request. So here we go. Again, a lot of times you're going to be reading a bunch of items or a lot of documentation. So we have HTTP requests. So if we look down here, you can see HTTP request.scheme, request.body, request.path, path info, method. So here's an example. If request.method equals get, do something. If it's a post request, do something else. So you have all these different attributes or keys on that HTTP request, cookies, files. We have a bunch of metadata, etc. And we have headers. Remember, every HTTP request has headers. So if we do request.headers, you can see all the different headers that come in. So let's actually just check request.headers. And if I refresh this, whoop, not that. Okay, nothing shows up here. But now you can kind of see all the headers: content length, content type, host, connection. This should kind of seem somewhat familiar to you. User agent, so like what browser we're using. We have this cookie. So it's got a bunch of different keys on that headers, on those headers. So yeah. So that's going to be part of your challenge today. What else? So what is one thing that we're not? So also I'll say in here, and we'll attack this tomorrow. Inside of your views is where you'll be interacting with your database or your models. But in this challenge, we're not having any models, or right now we're not dealing with any models because there's no data we want to actually use right now. But we'll tackle that tomorrow. And right here, we're just sending HTML straight back using a string and this HTTP response method. So that's what's happening here. And also in here, we're actually bypassing our templates, and we're just sending that HTTP response object. And that's what's creating our HTML for us. But tomorrow we'll actually start building out templates as well. Actually, we'll do that at some point tonight, I guess. So if we know that actually, let's do some different logic based off of the type of request we're doing. So what kind of request am I doing by just refreshing this?
Get request.
So yeah, if I click that, I come over here, it's a get request to localhost Django app 200. Okay. Here's that response. It's that H1. Yeah. And you can also see the headers and everything. So we're getting a get request. So if I do request dot method equals get, return this HTTP response, else I can just say like render not a get request. Just why not? And we will never actually get here yet, but we will at some point in the future. So maybe I want to, so let's actually see this. So if I refresh this, everything's still working. Great. What if I wanted to render something about the request? Such as, let's see, like, was it path info? I want to know what path info looks like. So I'm going to actually render an F string. This is a request.method. And here is the path info. Is it request.path info? All right. So if I refresh that, so this is a get request, and here's the path info, Django app. So path info is just that. But if I just do path, is that any different? No, same thing. So I can literally render specific aspect about the request. Any questions about this so far?
In the urls.py, you do views dot and then the name, and then you also do name equals. What's the relevance of having both, like views dot index and then name equals index?
So I could do views, import everything, and then just get rid of that. You can definitely do that. Everything will still work. It's just another way, just kind of how documented how it works. I can also get rid of that name equals index and it'll still work. But get in the habit of adding this name here, because as we start to link to other aspects, to other pages on our application, instead of hard coding a URL in our HTML, such as, yeah, I want to go to this specific article. It's like article/1, instead of hard coding that link, article/ insert some variable that represents the ID of that article. I don't actually have to do that. I can literally just name, this is called like a named route. So it'll look for this index inside of our HTML and it'll know to go to this URL. It's called a named route, and we'll get to it in the future, probably tomorrow.
That makes sense.
Yep. All right. What other questions do you have? Nothing. So all making sense. We'll do one more. We'll actually build out some templates or a template. So again, remember, comes over here, looks into our project URLs. Our project URLs will point to our app URL, our Django app URLs, which we'll have to create by like manually. We actually have to create this file because it doesn't already come in our Django app. And then our app URLs will point us to some method in our views.py file. And then this will handle all the business logic, whether or not we're going to be reading and writing to the database, etc. And then the views will return an HTTP response, either using this Django HTTP response object, or we can build out our own HTML templates and pass Python objects into our HTML templates. Does anybody remember the package that allows us to inject Python code into HTML?
Jinja?
Yep, Jinja 2 allows us to inject Python into our HTML templates. So Django uses Jinja 2. So that's actually, instead of passing in using this HTTP response to render HTML and some data, let's actually build out an HTML template. So inside of our Django app, we're going to create a directory called templates. And then inside of our templates folder, I'm going to create another directory, which is called the same name as our Django app. So Django_app. And then inside of our Django app directory, I'm going to create a file called index.html. Just want to make sure. And then here, I'm going to do HTML. Got some HTML in here. And then H1, this is an HTML template. Django templates or Django. All right. So I created this index.html template. And now, let's see. In place of this HTTP response, I want to render an HTML template. So inside the views, I need to render. Looks like I already have this render method that comes already with it. I don't have to import it. Like Django already imports it for me, like so. And in place of this HTTP response, I'm going to return this render method. And this render method takes in 3 arguments. It takes in the request, which we pass in from here. So it takes in the request. What HTML template do we want to render? And we want to render the Django app index.html template. And then the last argument is what data do we want to pass in? And remember, Jinja takes in an object as to pass in Python data. So right now I'm just going to pass in an empty object because I'm not actually rendering any Python data, like Python code inside of my HTML template. So this render method renders the request, where our Django app or our template is located, and it automatically knows to look for the templates directory, because I can get into why, but just right now, it automatically looks in our templates directory. And it's going to be looking for this index.html template inside of our Django app directory. And this object, we're not passing any data, but we need to pass in an object in this location. So if I refresh this, if I did everything right, it should work. So here we go. This is an HTML template. So we just completed the entire request response cycle for the Django project. So it comes into here, goes in the Django project URLs. Django project URLs points to our Django app URLs. Our Django app URLs points to a method to execute inside our views.py file that's associated with whatever URL pattern we are visiting. This views method runs some logic, and then it renders an HTML template. And then the HTML template gets sent to the client. So that's what's happening here. Comes into here. I visit Django. So when I refresh this, initially it comes into here. Because I visit that Django app / Django app /. All right. Now go look in the Django app URLs.py file. So I'm in the Django app.py, Django app URLs.py file. Matches that URL pattern because nothing is coming after that /. All right. Now it's looking for that index. Now it's pointing to the views, looking for a method called index, like so. And now it takes in that request. It's a get method. Render the request, the Django HTML template. Don't pass any data into that. Comes into here and renders this file. All right. Last, let's actually render some data. So let's actually just say, what kind of data do we want to render? Let's render data equals request type. And I can do request dot method. And then in here, again, this renders an object. I'm going to render this data object data. And then inside of my HTML template, I'm going to render H2. This is a request type method. So I'm actually actively passing this value as request type inside of this data object. So now I can access the keys inside of my HTML template directly. And these keys are the values on that data object. So if I refresh that, this is a get method. Questions?
So you're only ever going to be sending in one object because you're not calling it from dot syntax from the actual data variable. Like those key values are retrievable right in the HTML.
Yeah.
Even though that's the name. Okay.
So I can say like name, Tom, and then in here, I can say first name, name. And you can add as many keys as you want to this. All right, what questions do you have?
Will authentication use the same routing and pathways, or is that done differently?
That is, so you can use, it's going to be done different. Or no, I mean, like you're going to be creating. So again, Django has some built-in routes to handle authentication and all that, but you'll be creating your own URLs to go to like a login. But as far as like forgot password and all that, Django does have like a built-in URL patterns to handle that. But you'll have to like actually write the logic for a lot of stuff.
Okay, it's just in a different area.
Yeah, so actually Django does have like built-in user authentication and all that, but you'll also still create routes that will direct you to your custom login page and all that. Yeah, and we'll get to that in the next coming weeks. All right. Any other questions? No. So, oh, go ahead.
I've got another, it's more high level question than what we've been looking at today. Earlier, there was an example of having multiple apps, like Amazon.com has all these different services. I was wondering, as you're building a smaller application, at what point do you kind of, what do you consider when you're like, maybe this should be a separate app within the project?
And if it is like literally, if you think the logic in each given app aren't really related to one another, I guess that's how I would think of it. I almost think of these as like small microservices. Each app is like a microservice, like something that's totally separate. Yeah. And in this class, I don't think you'll ever be creating more than one app unless you want to. All right.
Okay, so it sounds like it's more like you create a separate app to organize your code.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So I just want to get in the habit. There's a process to this. So start with your Django app or Django project URLs. Go to your Django app URLs, create your URL pattern, create your view method, create your template. And then if you need to add another route, go back to your Django app URLs, create your new pattern, create your view method for that URL, and then create your HTML template for that method. So URL, view, template. URL, view, template. And we'll handle that process going forward.